I believe that it's an author's job to take the reader by the hand and say, I'm going to lead you through the terrain of this story.
Mm.
And it's going to be difficult, but I've got you. I'm here, and you're safe.
What's good? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published on the Mahogany Books Podcast Network, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Today's guest is Michele Norris, author of the novel When the Harvest Comes. The story is one Denne has been working on for 14 years, but couldn't unlock until she freed herself first.
I went to Vona, and that's where I met M. Evelina Galong, and she said, you're a very talented writer, but I think you're in the closet on the page. And that really reverberated within me because I had come out as, at that time, a gay boy when I was 15, and I was like, I'm very out. I'm very, like, everyone knows I'm gay. So how can I be in the closet on the page? But the real truth underneath that was that I just wasn't writing honestly.
In making sure her work was honest, Denne has pulled many personal details from her own life. How she worked through her issues of gender, race, and sexuality, using her characters and craft. Plus, the reason she believes it's her duty to walk readers through trauma hand in hand. And, as a classically trained violist, why Denne ultimately chose the page over an orchestra stage for her artistic expression. That and more is next, when Black and Published continues. We're here, you're in, and let's go. Denne, when did you know that you were a writer?
I have been looking forward to this question for so long because I'm such a big fan of the show. I knew that I loved to write and that writing was a part of me on the inside when I was in middle school. And so what happened was I had a couple friends who had just moved to the area and their parents worked with my dad. And so we became fast friends and we would like talk on the phone and we would write stories and read them to each other. I knew then that I loved writing and I knew from my earliest memories that I loved reading and that I loved stories, but I didn't realize that I would sort of orient my life around writing until I finished college.
What was that decision point or circumstance like when you said, you know what, writing is going to be it for me once you graduated from college?
It's a couple of things. The year was 2008. So that alone, we all know what that meant. The economy was trash. I had majored in English and I had had an idea for a novel and I'd taken one creative writing class. And I had kind of just thought, oh, I'll have a normal career, and when I retire, I'll like have a second career at 60, and I'll like start writing novels. But it was 2008, and as I struggled to figure out my path, I just thought, well, what if we try writing that novel now? And so I sat down and I started trying to write this novel that was sort of loosely based on the Scottsboro Boys trial, which was, if anyone doesn't know, a group of young Black men who were falsely accused of raping a white woman. And I realized how difficult it was to actually write a novel and that I didn't have any clue what I was doing or how to do it. And so I wrote a short story that summer. And by the end of the summer, I think I finished it in like September. I read it over immediately when I finished it. And I was like, this is terrible. But I thought to myself, I loved every second of doing this. And so this is what I want to do. And so that was like my emotional feeling. But the other thing is that it was the Olympics that year, and I'm a big gymnastics fan. When I was a kid, I was a gymnast for about 6 months. Shawn Johnson, the Olympic gymnast, was in the Olympics that year. And a commentator said that she had published, like, in addition to being an Olympic gymnast, she had like published 2 short stories in like her school's newspaper or something. And I just thought, if she could get published and go to the Olympics, I can get published too. And so truly. And then when Barack Obama won the election, that also made me think I could get published. If we can have a Black man as president of the United States, I can write a book and have it be published. And so all these things swirl together. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do.
I love the disparate inspiration points that brought you to this moment. But what I'm picking up on is you wanted to write a novel about the Scottsboro Boys. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's a group of 9 young Black boys in Alabama in 1931 who were accused of raping a white woman. They were indicted in jail. Some were lynched. Wasn't one executed?
I believe so. I believe one was executed.
And was one of the youngest executions in the country. Why that story did you want to try to fictionalize as your first novel and include all of that history? Because it makes sense having read Harvest. Like they're completely different, but
Mm-hmm.
I see the thread of connection there of like grappling with identity and sexuality and racial politics between the idea that you had and what you actually published as your debut novel and When the Harvest Comes.
I learned about it in high school. And I had a teacher in high school, a man named Peter Pake, who was really an extraordinary teacher. And he was pretty unvarnished about the version of American history that he taught. And so I learned about it there, and it always was in my head. And then when I took this creative writing class in college, there was a day where the teacher just brought around some images and gave them to us and was like, free write from these. And I just came up with this story, and I just wanted to write it more for the sake probably of having written, but I wanted to write something important. Um, I did work on it for a few years. Like when I was in graduate school, I took a research class and was working on it a little bit. It just wasn't, by that time, it wasn't the story that meant enough to me personally as an individual writer that somehow I felt that I had something to add to it that made it necessary for me to write it. I knew I had to find a story that only I could write, which I think is really important for writers. I will say that I had no conception of wanting to write as a career until that time. And that novel was just sitting there. And it was important for me to like do some of that work and realize how difficult it is to write something that is really worth someone's time.
I'm picking up on what you said about wanting to write something that was important and wanting to write something that was important to you. That is something that you have accomplished with your debut novel, When the Harvest Comes. When did that story come to you?
That story came to me in the year 2011, which means that it's been with me for 14 years. We all know sometimes a debut takes a long time to write. And it came to me in the summer between my 2 years in my MFA program. I went and did an MFA at Sarah Lawrence College. I had a couple of crises that happened, though, at that time. So I was 1 month into the program when my father passed away really suddenly. And it threw me into a tailspin. And I took 2 weeks or maybe a month off from school. I came back after Thanksgiving and was just sort of writing in this fog. And I produced a lot of work that my teachers thought was very good, but none of it meant anything to me. I wouldn't go back and do a lot of revision. I would revise enough to get the credit, and then I would write a new one. And I did that throughout the whole year. And I knew that my writing was strong. I knew I had some talent, but I was like, I have to do more than this if I'm actually going to publish something worth a person's $24. And I had 2 summer workshops that summer. I went to VONA, which is a wonderful workshop for writers of color. And that's where I met Evelina Galong. And she read the short story that I submitted to her. And she said, "You're a very talented writer, but I think you're in the closet on the page." And that really reverberated within me because I had come out as at that time a gay boy when I was 15, and I was like, I'm very out. I'm very like everyone knows I'm gay. Like also I was like, I can't, like, you don't look at me and think I'm straight. So like how can I be in the closet on the page? But the real truth underneath that was that I just wasn't writing honestly. And so I started actually writing what became this novel there at VONA. And my project, the way that I thought about it was, okay, I'm going to try and write something that's so close to my lived experience that I don't really have to fictionalize anything. And then I will be free to put all of my energy towards the emotional resonance of the work because I won't be putting any energy into convincing a reader of anything because I know that it's believable because I have seen it, right? Now, what I came up with is actually not that close to my life. But the point is that it started as an exercise and also a way for me to deal with grief.
You said it, and so I'm going to lean with it because I thought it as you were talking about grief and writing. and how long Harvest has been with you since 2011. It is now 2025. After I finished the novel, I went and did some digging on your Instagram because we have a mutual friend in common who knew you when you did identify as a gay man and you now identify as a woman of trans experience. And I don't want to be inappropriate, but it is a part of your story in so many different ways that we won't spoil. Do you feel like in the course of writing Harvest and everything that you've experienced and gone through as a person, as a writer in this industry, as a career, that you have been grieving pretty much these entire 14 years and are now at a place where you are truly free?
Oh, this is why I love this show. This is why, because you get at it. You get at it. And I'm going to give you a resounding yes, Nikisha. Yes. I think that this novel had to grow up alongside me. I had to grow up. I think that this novel was a way of holding on to a loss that I wasn't prepared for, that I wasn't ready for, and that took me by surprise and I still haven't fully dealt with, but that I'm used to now. Like I'm used to my father not being here. And I want to make very clear to readers, like anyone who knew my father will know that the Reverend in this book is not my father, like in really in almost any way. But writing this book, it was like I had the specter of him like behind my shoulder, looking over me. And it was a way to still feel close to him. And so I think that's part, it's not the only reason, there are many reasons, but it's part of the reason why it took me so long to get through it. And it's part of why it took me so long to feel like it was ready. And the triumph, the great triumph is that I'm okay. Like I
Mm.
think, I'm okay. And my father in heaven is okay. And I think he and I are okay. But I needed this time to figure that out. And I think there's a way in which the process of writing this novel was like a conduit between us and between the world that we live in and the spiritual realm, which I think is what art is.
Absolutely. So, over the course of the years that you were writing the novel and dealing with the ups and downs of life and industry, what are you doing for work? How are you making money? How are you not being broke? How are you paying off these student loans?
So for quite a few years, I wasn't paying the student loans, which is why, yes. Let me just be real with you and say that I finally have what's considered a very good credit score. And that is like maybe the greatest battle of my life. Like we have arrived. Um, and we're very happy about it. But no, so for many years, I finished graduate school in 2012 and I moved into New York City. And let me tell you, that first year was so rough. I had a part-time job at the Juilliard School where I was an administrative assistant. And I worked Monday through Friday at that job in the afternoons. And I worked at a Lush store in New York City. I worked at the Union Square Lush on the weekends. So I was working 7 days a week and I probably made $22,000 that year. And then I got a new job at the Harlem Children's Zone that was still part-time, but I was teaching on a team of writers with a bunch of writers, the poet Ricky Laurentis, the young adult writer Candice Ilo, Kimon Felix, Safia El Hila. We were all on this team doing literacy intervention in Harlem together. And I was like, whoa, this is a brilliant team. It felt like the second coming of the Harlem Renaissance, although the irony was that we all lived in Brooklyn. But that was like a fun time. And I worked there. They promoted me and gave me a full-time job. So then I had my own health insurance, which is great because then my family didn't have to pay for my health insurance anymore. And so I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was surviving. I was learning how to live in the city. But those first few years, I got very little writing done. And then in 2015, I got tired of it. And I said, you've got to get back on track. And so I gave myself a budget of $500 to spend on application fees to residencies. And I got into the Cambilio Fellowship. And I went there, and that was the year Angela Flournoy's novel, The Turner House, came out. And she became a friend, a mentor. She was like, you're super talented. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to help you move forward in this industry. And she really kept her word. And then all the writing started to take off. But that whole time I was doing nonprofit work. I started getting fellowships. So I was like going to McDowell, I was going to VCCA, I was starting to publish short stories, and I became the editor of Apogee Journal. And then I became the editor of The Rumpus. So I was doing all this editorial work, all of it for free, not getting paid anything, but starting to kind of build a name for myself while maintaining this career in what really became a career in youth development work. And then in 2018, I got hit by a car. I was leaving my work's gala, and my friends and I were going to go to a bar, and a driver just like made a wrong turn and hit me. And I broke an ankle, I broke a wrist, I had a bunch of back issues from it. I won a lawsuit, and that supported me for a year. And that was when I wrote part of the second draft. And I didn't have a job until COVID. I worked briefly in an LGBTQ healthcare startup before I got the job at Electric Lit. So it was a very windy road, managing a lot of things.
Managing a lot of things, but in all that time, the consistency, even if the consistency wasn't
Mhm,
writing, it was your dedication to the craft. And I think what a lot of
mhm,
people don't understand about writers, and what some writers tend to forget, self included, is that even if you are not actively writing on the page, your commitment to the craft and the vocation, whether it's applying for residencies or even just thinking about the work and knowing that I've got to get,
mhm.
like, this idea is not leaving me, I've got to do something with it. And so you're actively thinking about it, it's still part of the process.
Yes, people forget that, but it's absolutely part of the process. And it's why sometimes what happens is then you can sit down and write very quickly. I would go months without writing, but I was always thinking about these characters in this book, always. And when I got to McDowell in 2017, I took the first 36 hours to adjust. And then I gave myself the first week to write a short story because I'd been solicited to send a story to Tin House. And then the next 7 weeks were dedicated to my novel. And I wrote the first draft at 75,000 words. And it was because I had let that energy build up, but it was also because I had all this stuff in my mind that I had been thinking about. But the other thing that I should also make a note of, and I still feel this way, is that I loved it so much that I was like, I don't know that I care how successful I am as a writer. I just want to do it. And if I end up having to teach writing to make my living, if I end up being an editor to make my living, like if I'm in the world of books and stories and words, in whatever role I can be in, I will be happy to do it. And I always had that attitude, and I still have that attitude. I genuinely love being an editor. I'm a nerd about the business. I always want to hear about the inner workings of what's going on in the publishing houses because I'm just fascinated by it and obsessed with it. I love working with writers. And so the goal, really, in whatever way it turned out, was to become full time literary, to not have to do anything else, but to be in that world. And that happened. It shifted a little bit because I was like, this probably does have to come first, is my own writing. And that's where I think I have the most gifts. But I love all of it. I love all of it. And I'm just happy to be a part of it. Like I'm just happy to be here.
So then let's talk about the industry and the literary world, because you've named all of your credits, all your bona fides, your receipts list is long. And then also you are the editor in chief of Electric Literature. You've had the honor of publishing so many wonderful voices and authors and writers as you were working on your own craft and project. I'm going to ask the question, although I think I know the answer. Once Harvest was done and you were ready to get the agent, go on submission, was it easy for you to get into those doors because of all of the community that you had built prior to?
Unequivocally, the answer is yes. Um, by the time I finished Harvest, I was a known entity in the publishing world, right? So I had an agent for 4 years already who was and is phenomenal. He was already fielding asks from editors about this book and had been for a couple of years, like people were interested. And so I think it was easier. And I think people don't always understand how much community goes into this work. And I think writers who are writing and publishing are so into community most of the time. And I think part of the reason is because so much of the work that we do is so isolating, right?
Hmm.
Like we have to have time to ourselves, we have to have quiet, we have to have focus. And we often have to do it on top of having day jobs, which means more time that's taken away from the people we love and the things we love and being out sort of in the world. And like I sometimes have to remind myself to get outside and touch grass because I spend so much time alone because I work from home as well for Electric Lit. And so community is like key to our survival, and also to getting doors open to us, to getting us into rooms, to getting us opportunities. When you look at my long list of bona fides and my bio, every single thing I think that's there in some way came to me through someone who's a member of my community who learned of that opportunity and thought that I was a good fit and spoke my name in the room, or at least passed along the application to me. Every single thing. So, absolutely 100%, it was easier for me and things went quickly because of that. And so, one piece of advice I give writers all the time, and it worked for me because I was in the space, I was in the field, I was becoming a known entity, but I always tell people, like in my case, like taking my time has only benefited me. I have
Mm.
only like gotten the better job that was for me. I wrote a better book. I probably got a better publisher with more support than I would have if I had finished this book in 2018 and sold it then. So taking my time, focusing on my craft, also focusing on community, and being genuinely like, I'm genuinely excited about other writers. I'm genuinely excited to do everything I can to support them to get, I think everyone should be a writer. Like, I don't understand how anyone wants to have a different career. Like, I'm so obsessed with this career and this like world. Like, it doesn't compute to me. So like, I want to help people do it. And so if and when people say I'm a good literary citizen, it like truly comes from that place. And again, like, I'm just happy to be a part of it. And so when you move with that kind of genuine quality and that kind of intention, I think maybe people recognize it and they're even more willing to help you out when the time comes. And all of that is because I had patience and took time.
And I think that goes both ways. And so, can you please read something from the novel and I can dive into all of my questions?
Yes, yes, I'm so excited to do that.
When the Harvest Comes by Michele Norris is a true love story about an interracial gay couple. Everett and Davis are getting married when they receive devastating news that sends them on a journey of understanding themselves and each other and the true meaning of tenderness and intimacy. Here's Denne. And just a warning, this reading is very sexy, just in case you have any young ears around.
Do you want some spice?
I like spice.
Okay, I'm going to read the opening of chapter 1. Davis Josiah Freeman is perfectly safe. He lies flat on his back, legs spread, ankles in the air, sweating from the heat of Everett's body on top of his. He revels in Everett's power, the strength of his arms, the hardness of his chest, and the tuft of dark hair that fans out from his navel. Davis loves the softness of that hair against the hardness of Everett's body, like a window through which he could almost touch Everett's soul. Davis aches when Everett pushes deeper. He whimpers, then opens. He would be willingly consumed by Everett, swallowed whole if it were possible. He places one hand on Everett's chest, the other gently on his neck, and pulls him down, eyes meeting eyes, lips parting for lips. When Everett is inside him, Davis becomes another thing, a being both powerful and delicate, animal yet celestial. Everett is uncomplicated in his manliness. The depth of his voice is penchant for bourbon and stout, the sheer size of him, both height and broadness. He becomes beastly during sex, and with any other man it would scare Davis. But with Everett, he need not be fearful. Davis looks up at the way Everett's eyes have gone slack, almost milky white, his pupils having rolled to the back of his head. In some ways, Davis envies Everett this existence, moving through the world with the easy confidence of a man who is always in charge, always sure of himself. He is passionate and unafraid of a fight. Davis knows that with Everett by his side, he gets to live a particular kind of freedom. He can be silly. He can be naive. He can have a tank full of sugar, as he'd once heard the Reverend say. Davis can do this because he is loved and desired, which means he is protected. His breath catches when Everett takes his wrists, pulls them up over his head, and brings them together, binding him to the bed. Everett lowers his chest until their torsos meet. He buries his lips in Davis's neck, breathing in the perfume with which Davis carefully dabbed himself that evening. He nibbles, Davis moans, and Everett thrusts deeper, rougher, his body now slapping hard against Davis, who shudders, then whimpers again, his voice turning up on the final syllable as though the name, Everett, is a discovery, both question and answer. He arches his back, opening himself more fully. Everett peers into his eyes, then spits into his mouth. Davis feels his flesh come live, the tips of his fingers burn, trees turn to ash. Everett is anywhere, everywhere, his presence heard and felt with the matter-of-factness of air, trees, and water. He fills Davis and he fills the room, with every movement more frenzied than the last. He drives Davis to bite his bottom lip, to clench the sheets. Davis convulses, and when he comes, fingernails digging into Everett's back, he considers this. He could not escape this man if he needed to. He is not strong enough to fight Everett off, not quick enough to move from underneath him. He loves the vulnerability of this, the theoretical danger in their union. He thinks all the time of that vulnerability. In a way, it turns him on. It's an illusion, of course. Everett would never harm him, but he loves it nonetheless, and he knows Everett loves it too.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with my first question on page 4. You said he is loved and desired, which means he is protected. How does love and desire equate to protection for you?
It's interesting. I think that in this relationship, what I was wanting to portray was the idea that, I mean, first of all, I wanted to portray a couple that was just like incandescently happy and so deeply in love with each other. But I think what I was really getting at in terms of questions of safety and protection was this idea that in this relationship, in this space, in this home, in whatever bubble that these two people are able to create for themselves, is a space where they're both safe to be their fullest and most honest self. And they're safe to burrow within themselves and do the work of understanding their depths and what's at the core for each of them and growing into that person. Because one of the things about life is that it's always going to be about growth and learning and gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves. And when it comes to relationships, people can either choose to grow together or grow apart, but they can only grow together if the relationship itself is a free space, is a safe space. And I wanted it to be sort of clear that that's what this couple has, even in the early pages, even though they don't necessarily fully know that or understand that about relationships or about their relationship. And so it's really about that. But also on a more material level, Davis just feels safe with this man. Like he feels like if he's caught in a back alley with Everett, Everett can
Beat
handle
that
it.
ass. Yes.
Yes.
No, I love that in the explanation because for me, it sets up the novel of what they're getting ready to experience, as you mentioned earlier. And so it's not giving anything away. This mirrors the grief that you experienced when you lost your father unexpectedly. And the same thing happens to Davis. And then Everett and Davis have to reckon with that. And Davis really has to find his way back to his safe space, which is Everett, who is his husband in the novel. I think one of my favorite scenes of where that is indicated is actually when Everett is talking about how they're watching the coverage after the South Carolina church shooting at Mother Emanuel. And that's also the same day that the Supreme Court upheld marriage equality and it was passed. And so that morning was the funeral where President Obama sang Amazing Grace. And then that night, we see all of the joyful celebrations around the White House, and it's lit up in the colors of the pride flag and all of that. And Everett tells this story about that was the night that Davis asked him to oil his scalp. That is such an intimate activity to be like, oil my scalp in the midst of this great national grief, but also this great national pride and communal pride and celebration for marriage equality and love is love. Why put that into the act of oiling one's scalp as like the ultimate act of love and acceptance? And there is safety here, even though there might be violence outside.
I wish I could explain it. It just happened. It just came to me. I always knew that Everett and Davis had to deal with that moment because I realized that it was going to be set in the fall of 2016. And so once I did that, I knew that I had to deal with this moment because for me, that day had been this experience of intense cognitive dissonance of that morning, watching that coverage. And my own father was a minister who grew up in South Carolina. Almost his entire side of the family still lives in South Carolina. It felt like a moment that was very close to me. And I, watched that clip and watched some of the coverage from the funeral, and then I went to work and did my job. And then when I came home, many of my friends were like dancing in the streets, literally, and playing with noisemakers. And they wanted me to come out. And at first I was like, no, no. They convinced me, and I did end up going out with them that night. But it was just this moment of extreme cognitive dissonance because it felt like my identity was almost being divided by community, because some people were experiencing that day one way and some people were experiencing that day in another way. And I had what felt like a relatively unique experience of experiencing that day in a multitude of ways, in a very complex way. And so I was like, I have to write that into the novel. And I just thought it would be really interesting and fun to kind of explore those differences, right? Because Davis and Everett are so different, right? And Davis is Black and Everett is white. And so I just had a lot of fun with thinking about how they might experience that day differently, and how Everett might realize, without there being something ugly, like he might realize, oh, here's a blind spot that I have, and here's a way that I need to show up for this person. And then it was, I think, only in the final revision where I wrote in the part about the hair. I wanted to show tenderness between them. And knowing what the arc of the book was, I wanted to show a moment of Davis giving himself over to Everett for physical tenderness and physical love and physical safekeeping without it being a sexual moment. I wanted it to just be a moment of existence. And I also thought, oh, this moment can potentially allude to what their future might be, which I was like interested in. That physical intimacy, that physical touch, and Davis giving himself over to Everett in this way, because so much of the novel was going to be Davis not doing that.
You read a sex scene for us, but I would argue that moment is more intimate than the sex scenes that are in the book. One thing that I noticed in reading Harvest is that you will tell us a story about a piece of something that is traumatic, but you won't tell us exactly what happened or exactly what was said, but we know it's coming. And then when we get to that scene, we've been prepared for it. It's almost like the trigger warning before the actual reveal. Was that intentional?
Mm. Yes, that was intentional. That was absolutely intentional. And the reason boils down to a few things. When I went to Tin House in 2016, I got to study under Alexander Chee in his novel writing workshop. And I was thinking about the ending of the novel. I knew how I wanted it to end, but I also had a feeling that a more realistic end might be a different thing. And I was really conflicted. And he and I talked about that. And he said to me, you know, our lives are not only trauma, and our art cannot only be that. And I don't know that I was really at risk of doing that, but it made it so that I intentionally started thinking about showing kindness both to my characters and to the reader. And I was like, you know, I think there's a way to write about traumatic events and still capture the fullness of experience and the fullness of life, and try to make it so that the reader hopefully experiences it as like a flash of something without leaving them in it and drowning them in it, which for me is not the point of art and is not the point of literature. My goal is not to traumatize a reader, you know? And so the big question is, how do we write about trauma if we're going to write about trauma? How do we write about trauma in a way that, first of all, makes it as clear as it needs to be what happened and what the character is coping with, and how does it inform the story? Because what I'm not interested in is having the trauma be the story. It's an element of the story, but the story is the character, and the story is the character's life. And I have no interest in writing characters that are reduced just to their trauma. And so the work can't be reduced to just the trauma, and the reader needs to get the fullness of these people.
I think maybe even unconsciously, as much as you were taking care of your character to not center their lives around the most traumatic events of their lives, because that's not how we operate as people, I think it also worked to take care of your reader, in that, you know, you're dealing with hard conversations, hard subject matter, hard events in this man's life and this couple's life, but you don't like open your reader up and then leave them there, or you don't harm them and leave them there. You don't leave your reader traumatized. You make sure they walk away with the tenderness of the story and not the hard parts. And I wonder, because your book deals with so much intersectionality between race, between gender, even between class, that you wanted to make sure that no matter where readers were coming from, they were able to, if not necessarily see themselves in the work, but understand the emotionality behind it and the interiority of their characters. Because at the end of the day, to me, this book is a love story, and it's a very human story. And it's one that I think anybody can relate to, even if they don't cross these specific identity markers.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you're like gonna make me cry. So it's interesting. I'm glad that the book does that, and I wanted it to do that. But I felt like as I was reading it, I felt like I was writing for younger me, this
Mm,
novel. This is the novel that I needed to read when I was 14. And so I was writing for a Black reader, a Black queer reader, a Black femme reader. I was writing for Black women. And I knew how common some of these experiences and traumas are for these communities that I'm a part of in different ways. So if I was going to add to that in terms of telling those stories, I wanted to do it in a way where readers would hopefully come away from this feeling safe and held, because that's
mm-hmm,
what writing does for me, and that's what reading does for me. And I wanted people to remember that there's always room and opportunity for redemption. And I absolutely wanted to take care of the reader. I just am not interested in harming a reader. If something is really necessary for the story, then, it's going to be in there. But I'm always going to try to write in a way that exercises compassion for the reader. I believe that it's an author's job to kind of take the reader by the hand and say, I'm going to lead you through the terrain of this story.
mm.
And it's going to be difficult. And there will be challenges and roadblocks that come up that will be difficult for you to face, but I've got you. I'm here and you're safe. That's what I want every book I write to do for readers.
And I believe you succeeded because you don't shy away from talking about or even depicting the homophobia that the characters experience in their community, within their own families, some of the harmful language that is used against them, or stereotypes that they are fitting into that their family members used to describe them. But that is not what the reader walks away with at the end of the novel. At least it's not what I walked away with. I do want to ask the question though, because you've told me about gymnastics for 6 months and you've told me about figure skating. We didn't talk about the viola. Do you play the viola? Because I'm like, Davis is a world class violist. I didn't know Denne played the viola. And all of the research here, even about how big the instrument can be, it's always going to be a little bit off. I was like, what kind of classical music research savant are you?
That is a great question and very fun to talk about. I did play the viola. So listen, I didn't have to do a lick of research about viola or the classical music world. I played the viola very seriously, and I started in the fourth grade. And my parents loved music and loved classical music. My mother wanted all of us to take lessons when we were kids, and all of my siblings actually played the piano, and that was what I was going to play. But I pushed back. I wanted to play the violin. It was a better opportunity to play the viola because no one plays the viola. So I started playing viola. And when I got to high school, there were some really spectacular musicians in my high school orchestra. And I started playing more sophisticated music and I fell in love with it. And I really wanted to be a professional violist from that point on, but I felt like I was behind the pack. And so I worked really hard in high school and wasn't quite strong enough to go to like a top tier conservatory, but I was only interested in going to like a top school for anything I wanted to do because I was a little bitch. Like when I was in high school, I just was a little snot. And so my teacher, she said I should go to Haverford and continue to study and go to music school afterwards if I still want. She also was like, listen, being a musician is terrible. Like it's a terrible life and you're smart and you can do other things. So go to college, get an education. And if you still want to play the viola professionally after that, then you can get a master's degree in performance. And so that was like my plan through college. I played in the orchestra, I did chamber music. I was like the musician about town. Um,
And then you
doing everything.
discovered writing.
And then I discovered writing. Really, my second semester of my senior year of college, I was practicing 3, 4 hours a day. And I all of a sudden at some point, I just was like, I'm tired of practicing 4 hours a day. I didn't want it that badly. Like I didn't want to play viola that badly. And so when I got into writing and I was so excited about it, and I was like, I want to do anything here. I'm just happy to be here. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was when I was like, this is a path I can take because I can have no talent and I can have no real prospects at like having success and I still want to do this. And like I would be happy to teach people and I would be happy to like do whatever. I was like, if I'm gonna have a creative thing that I pursue, it needs to be this and not the
Mm.
viola where I only want it to work out in one way. And so that impacts that. But the point is, it was a huge part of my life. All of the musical stuff was only like a step away from me because I came so close to being in that world professionally.
Okay, because I was like, we got a whole lot on this here viola. And kudos to you, because like I didn't know. So before we jump into the speed round of the game, I want to ask, because you talked about that first story that you wrote or were trying to write about the Scottsboro boys. It makes me wonder, as far as what comes next after Harvest, do you think that you have a historical fiction novel in you?
Not yet, but I think it's possible.
Mm.
I just have to find the right thing. I think one thing that's interesting is that, like, I think my approach to writing novels is going to evolve as I move forward. I don't know if I'll ever write a novel that is as personal to me as this one is. I think that as I move forward, there will be more and more fictive distance. And so I think that creates room for a historical novel. But I will say this, the project that I'm currently working on, I'm still figuring out a lot of things about it. I'm only a few pages into it, but I've had the idea for like 10 years, 11 years. So I'm hoping again that I can write it relatively quickly, and it's going to take more research than Harvest did, but it might take place in the 90s, which at this point doesn't
Is
quite make a historical novel, but maybe it does,
it kind of does. It was like 30 years ago.
right? That's like 30 years ago, which is wild to me. And if it takes place in the 90s, there will be stuff in it from like the 60s. So it might be historical ish.
For sure. So, speed round time. What is your favorite book?
Oh my gosh. Just one, right?
Top five? What you got?
Okay. One of my favorite books is the novel Ghana Must Go by Taiye Selasi, which I'm obsessed with. I just think that what she does on the sentence level is extraordinary. Olive Kittredge by Elizabeth Strout is one of my favorite novels. I love that old white woman. Like, I can't get enough of her. She's witty and funny and bitchy and nasty. And also, in all of the ways in which she's nasty and terrible, she's incredibly big hearted. And I just feel like it showed me so much about what we can do with character and with humanity and the fullness that we can bring to narratives. And I also really love The Bluest Eye. I live and breathe that book.
Who is your favorite author?
Toni Morrison. I mean, in terms of body of work, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, actually, I love his fiction, which he's not as well known for, but his short stories are just extraordinary.
Who is your favorite poet?
Lucille Clifton. Oh, and Claudia Rankine. And also Patricia Smith.
You mentioned Kimon Felix earlier, and I think
Yes.
Jason Reynolds talked about, this new cohort of poets.
Mhm.
Name a poet that you think more people need to know about.
Come on, Felix. I mean, is there anyone more talented on this earth than Kimon Felix in every way? I think Kimon Felix, I think Ricky Laurentis, who is a genius. I'll settle with those two for now. Oh, and little known fact, though, if people don't know, the novelist Tiffany Yannick, she writes poetry too. She's published a poetry book, and more people need to know about that. It's a great book.
If Harvest were to get the screen treatment, who would you want to play Everett and Davis? And I want you to really lean into this because we're all going through withdrawal because P Valley is not back on air, and we've needed a whole lot since Pose.
Mm. Ciao. Okay, so for Everett, I have had the actor Lee Pace in mind. There's another actor who people might know him from the movie The Greatest Showman. He played the strong man, Timothy Hughes, I think would be phenomenal as an Everett. For Davis, I really love Justice Smith, I think would be incredible. Jonathan Burke would be incredible. My dream would be actually an androgynous performance by India Moore.
Mm.
And I'll give you another one. I would love the woman who read my audiobook is L. Morgan Lee. And she is the first Black trans woman to be nominated for a Tony Award for A Strange Loop. And I would love for her to play Olivia.
What do you think is the best book to screen adaptation?
The novel Atonement by Ian McEwan, I think that was an incredible adaptation. I think it's really hard to adapt a book to the film screen. I actually think miniseries often is better for a lot of novels, but I think that adaptation, that's another one where I think the movie is as good as the book. And I consume both at least once a year.
All right. If money were no object, where would you go? What would you do? And where would you live?
Even though I love being an editor, I would probably just write. Like I would write full time and just edit a little bit when I wanted to. I would go everywhere. Like I would go to every continent and travel extensively. And I would have homes in a few different places. I would have a home in LA. I would have a home in New York City. I might have a home upstate in New York or in Philadelphia. And I think I would have a home maybe in Paris. I've never been to Paris, so maybe I would hate it, but I think I would love it. And I think I would want to live there. And maybe a home in Italy, and maybe a home in the Greek islands, maybe a home in Belize, which is a country I love a lot. I would just have homes that I could bop around to, but I would have a very quiet life.
What brings you joy?
Quiet, peace, my dog, you know, he's my baby. I look at him, so many people are like when they're like telling their dogs how much they love them, like, you're my best friend, you're my best friend. He's not my best friend, he's my child. You know, there's a difference. I love him desperately, but he brings me joy. A good cocktail at night, like a good cocktail or a good glass of wine, and really great sushi brings me incredible joy.
And what brings you peace?
Quiet.
Mm.
Quiet brings me peace.
So our game is rewriting the classics. Classic is however you define it. Name one book you wish you would have written.
The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy.
Name one book where you want to change the ending, and how would you do it?
I would change the ending to On Beauty by Zadie Smith. It's been a long time since I read that book, but I did not like how it ended. And I forget if the couple at the center of it ended up together or separate. But however they ended, I felt like it should have been the opposite. And I would have written the entire book towards that.
And of course, the messy question. Name a book that you think is overrated or overtaught, and why?
Can I name two?
Sure.
On the Road by Jack Kerouac for me, and The Catcher in the Rye.
Oh.
Yeah, The Catcher in the Rye, I think, is overtaught in particular. I don't think it's nearly as great of a novel as like people think it is. I just don't know why we hold it up. I don't know.
And so my final question for you today. When you are dead and gone and among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about the legacy of words and work that you've left behind?
Gosh, I think you said it perfectly earlier. I would like them to write that she took care of her characters, and she took care of her people, and she took care of her readers.
Big thank you to Denne Michele Norris for being here today on Black and Published. You can follow Denne on the socials at The Denne Michele on Instagram and Threads. And Denne is spelled DenneMichele. Denne Michele. Real fancy. Make sure you check out Denne's novel, When the Harvest Comes, out now from Random House. And you can get a copy of her novel from Mahogany Books and get 10% off your first purchase using code BLACKPUB at checkout. That's BLKPUB. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, head to our Instagram page. It's at Black and Published, and that's BLK and Published. There, I've posted a bonus clip from my interview with Denne about how she feels now that the novel is out after so many years in, around, and at times at the center of the literary world. Make sure you check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll holler at y'all next week. when our guest will be Dwight Thompson, author of the novel My Own Dear People.
The writing was getting the kind of response that I wanted, that it made people feel uncomfortable. So I knew I was doing something right in that sense, because they were actually feeling my pain, so to speak, going through my experience.
That's next week on Black and Published. I'll talk to you then. Peace.
What's going on, family? This is Derek Young
and Ramonda Young,
owners of both Mahogany Books and the Mahogany Books Podcast Network.
We really want to thank each and every one of you for listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed what you just heard, drop us a review and rate us on whatever platform you download podcasts on.
We truly appreciate each and every one of you for supporting us and making us your go-to for Black books. And we look forward to connecting with you all sometime in the future.
Thank you again, fam. And always remember, Black books matter.